Galaxy S11 is looking like a lot of things. Some of them really impressive, and then others not so much. First things first, cameras. And Samsung phones have had consistently good cameras for a while now, but the imaging hardware itself has not taken a big leap forward since the Galaxy S7. That is about to change. With their new 64-megapixel ISOCELL Bright GW1 image sensors, Samsung phones are about to take not just high-resolution photos, but ones with even greater dynamic range and with faster autofocus. It's also looking likely that it's going to allow for 480 frames per second continuous slow motion video in clean Full HD resolution. Now, the S11 Plus is not going to be the first phone to use this sensor, but it will be the best one because it's going to be combining that with 3 other cameras for just maximum flexibility. Now, I've already heard a bit of talk about the next Samsung devices being powered by a hyper-efficient 5nm chip. That would be great, but just judging by past history, these flagship phone chips, they tend to get this boost in efficiency once every 2 years, and it's only been once since we started seeing the current 7nm chips. On the flip side though, Samsung has announced a partnership with AMD, and has pretty clearly stated that its purpose is to create mobile graphics chipsets for Samsung smartphones. So you might know that in the PC market, AMD is pretty widely known for their Radeon graphics architecture. And so if Samsung managed to leverage that company's expertise, it could well mean a Galaxy S11 that completely fries the competition when it comes to gaming. It kind of reminds me of when Nvidia were making mobile chips, and how they managed to produce a 72-core GPU in a phone where most others barely had 4. But also remember that this Radeon partnership might only benefit phones powered by the Exynos chipset, so it might not affect people in the US and other regions that get the Snapdragon. There is good news though for Qualcomm users in that all S11s, whether based on the Snapdragon 865 or the Exynos equivalent, should have a 5G modem built into the chip. The current solution in phones like the S10 5G is actually having a separate modem that sits alongside the chip, and so weaving them together could mean not just a slimmer smartphone, but also a more efficient one. The S11 Plus would also pair this with UFS 3 storage and up to 12GB of RAM. On the subject of power, we haven't seen any clear-cut leaks on battery life, but I think it would be a pretty safe assumption to guess about 4,100 mAh. If you look at their past devices, the S8 Plus had 3,500 mAh. Because the S9 phones were more of a refinement of the S8, they had the same, but the S10 Plus was a full redesign, and so along with that came a battery boost. Assuming then that the S11 is yet another refinement phone, it should carry a similar capacity battery. What is a bit more than just a refinement though, is that it should also be getting the same 45-watt charging that we should be seeing on the Note 10 as well. I've already made an in-depth video all about the Note 10 by the way, so if you do want to see that, I'll link it as a card above. Visual differentiation is really important for a company like Samsung, because obviously you've got tech nerds like us who we're always going to know what the latest flagship phone is, but for an average consumer walking into a store to upgrade, they might not be able to tell. So you may have actually noticed that with each new flagship phone, Samsung adjusts the aesthetic for seemingly no other reason than to look unique. Consider the change from the S9 Plus to the Note 9. If anything, the camera layout on the S9 Plus made sense, it looked clean, and the fingerprint scanner was far down enough on the phone to reach. And yet, on the Note 9 later on in the year, they took what seemed like a backward step on this, which will, at least in part, just have been to make it feel new. So this could mean a whole number of things on the S11, but this is just what I think so far. We all know that the S10 phones have this pretty sizable hole punch in the top right corner, and the expectation for the Note 10 is for that hole punch to not just shift to the center, but to become smaller. It's quite possible then that the S11 will utilize this smaller hole punch from the Note 10, but with the positioning of the S10. I don't think that the S11 is where we'll see any kind of under-screen front camera, because the current compromise with quality is a little too high. Another aspect of this that I find kind of interesting is naming. Now that the company has hit the golden 10 number with the Galaxy S10, it might be time for a change. You could argue that if they continue this naming trend, you're just going to end up with a load of less special feeling devices. And it could just end up being a bit of a mouthful. Could you imagine if down the line they started releasing a phone called the Samsung Galaxy S11 Plus? At the same time though, the Galaxy brand has a lot of power. People see it and they have a lot of positive associations towards it. So instead of ditching it, it probably makes sense to start a new series within it. For example, they could name this phone, instead of the Galaxy S11, the Galaxy X1, which would then be followed by the X2 the year after, and go from there. there is almost definitely no headphone jack on this phone, and chances are it's even going to be dropped on the Note 10 coming before it. It's more a question of when as opposed to if, it's just the direction that the industry is heading. As for the price, it's a pretty safe estimate that the S11 Plus is going to fall into the same bracket as the Note 10 Pro, so it's safe to expect a starting price of between $1,050 to $1,100. And don't forget that by this time, the S10 Plus will be closer to $600, so it'll be up to you as to whether or not that purchase makes sense. Now, that is the stuff that we're likely to see, but as well as that, there are just a few things that I'd really want to. For example, consideration when it comes to ergonomics. Samsung has a bit of a history with putting buttons and sensors in places that just don't make sense. The Note 8 had its fingerprint scanner impossibly high up on the back of the phone, and the S10 Plus's power button literally requires a hand shuffle every time you want to press it. What is kind of nice is that with the S10 phones, Samsung has massively cut down on the actual weight, so they are much more comfortable to hold, and I just hope that with the S11 and moving forward, they kind of learn from what has worked. The second thing is a better camera night mode. I was really excited when I found out that Samsung was planning to introduce night mode on the Galaxy S10, because its hardware is just so capable, especially with a variable aperture that opens up at night to let more light in. And the capability is still there, but it just so happens that their execution of the night mode on the S10 was pretty weak. If Samsung managed to improve this software, and being optimistic, let's say they managed to match what the Pixels are currently capable of, then combining that with the new 64 megapixel sensor they're gonna have, you could get unprecedented low light shots, in theory. As for a potential 90Hz refresh rate, I would personally opt out. I really do like the slickness it adds to the UI, but at least with the current tech, there's still too much of an impact on battery life. I've actually disabled this setting on my OnePlus 7 Pro because I found that after a couple of weeks of using it, your eyes adjust to the refresh rate and you stop feeling the novelty of it. And so at this point, this is my personal preference, everyone is a little different in this, but I found that instead of appreciating that extra smoothness of the screen, I spent more time wishing I had that extra hour or so of screen on time by putting it back to 60Hz. Alright, so just your standard disclaimer that a lot of the stuff in this video is based on early leaks and some speculation on my part. So I do hope it's given you an idea of what to expect, but at the same time, clearly there's a lot of stuff that is not set in stone. If you enjoyed this video, a sub would be massively appreciated. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.